The phone rang sharp and shrill, cutting through the quiet of the living room. I gripped the cold ceramic mug in my hand, the steam from the coffee long gone, and answered without looking at the caller ID. "You always think you know everything, George, but you're blind to what's happening in your own house," Ashley said, her voice tight as a wire. I frowned, the words landing like a slap. "What are you talking about? You're so busy auditing other people's books you can't see the ledger in your own kitchen," she replied. "Loss is gone. You need to come to the morgue now." My stomach tightened. Loss was my son, 23, bright and stubborn. The thought of him lying cold on a slab made my throat dry. "I'll be there," I said, my voice flat. I set the mug down, feeling the faint ring left on the wood. I drove through the autumn streets, the scent of damp leaves drifting through the open window. The radio murmured a soft jazz tune, but I turned it off, needing silence. The morgue building loomed ahead, its brick facade gloomy under a gray sky. I parked and walked inside, the smell of antiseptic sharp in my nostrils. A young officer met me in the lobby, his badge catching the fluorescent light. "Mr. Whitmore?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes." He led me down a hallway lined with stainless steel doors. The hum of the ventilation system was low, almost like a breath. We stopped at a door marked with a number. He opened it, and I stepped into a small viewing room. A stainless steel table stood in the center. A white sheet pulled over a figure. My breath caught as the officer pulled the sheet back. The face that stared up at me was unmistakably Loss's, high cheekbones, the same stubborn chin, the faint scar above his left eyebrow, from a bike accident when he was 12. But the paperwork clipped to the table read, "Loss Whitmore, female." My mind reeled. How could this be? My son, 23. Loss had always been male, his voice deep, his shoulders broad. "Officer, there's a mistake," I said, my voice rough. "This is my son. He is male." The officer glanced at the chart, then back at me. "The autopsy report indicates female. We need you to confirm identification." I leaned closer, studying the hands resting on the sheet. They were slender, the nails trimmed short, but the knuckles bore the familiar calluses from his part-time job at the garage. "He's my son," I repeated, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "I know his body." The officer hesitated. "If you're sure, we'll proceed." Before I could answer, the door swung open, and Ashley stepped inside, her eyes red, but her posture composed. She moved to my side, laying a hand on my arm. "George, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her tone soft but edged with something I couldn't place. "This is Loss. She was my stepsister too." I jerked my arm away, the contact feeling like a brand. "Loss is not a sister. He is my son." Ashley's smile was thin. "You've always seen things in black and white, George. The truth is sometimes more complicated. And Loss was also my step-sibling once." I forced my eyes back to the body. The sheet had slipped slightly, revealing a collarbone that looked too delicate for Loss's usual build. "Can I see her identification?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The officer handed me a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it, reading the name again. "Loss Whitmore, female, date of birth, March 12th, 2001. The officer gave me a folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it, reading the name again. "Loss Whitmore, female, date of birth, March 12th, 2002. My fingers trembled as I traced the letters. Something felt off, like a misplaced decimal in a balance sheet. "Officer, can we get a second opinion?" I asked. "Maybe a different examiner." He shook his head. "The report is clear. We need your confirmation to release the body. Ashley leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. You've been distant since Mom passed. Maybe you're not seeing what's right in front of you. I felt heat rise in my neck. Not anger, but a fierce need to protect the truth of my son. I need a moment alone, I said, pushing past her gently. She let go, watching me as I walked to the far wall and stared at the ticking clock above the door. Each second sounded like a soft hammer, each tick a reminder that time was slipping. I closed my eyes, picturing Loss laughing at a family barbecue, the smell of charcoal and sweet corn filling the air. I remembered the way he would toss a football with me in the backyard, his grin wide, his effort evident in the set of his jaw. When I opened my eyes, Ashley was still there, her expression unreadable. George, she began, I know this is hard, but we have to think about the estate. Mom left a trust, and Loss, she is the primary beneficiary now. My stomach twisted again, but this time from a different source. A suspicion that something was being manipulated. What trust? I asked, keeping my tone even. The one Mom set up before she died, she replied. It's all in the paperwork. Loss is to inherit everything. I stared at her, trying to read the sincerity in her eyes. You're saying Loss, my son, is now a woman? And the heir? Ashley nodded. It's what Mom would have wanted. She always said she wanted her children to be taken care of. A coldness settled in my chest, not from fear, but from the sense that the ground beneath me had shifted. Officer, I said, turning back to him, I need to see the full report. All of it. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll get it for you. As he left, Ashley moved to stand beside me again, her hand brushing my elbow. This time, I didn't pull away, but I stiffened. Let's get through this, she murmured. For Mom, I looked at her, seeing the practiced concern, the way her voice softened at the right moments. It felt like a performance, yet I couldn't deny the ache in my own heart for my son. The officer returned with a thick folder. He placed it on the table and opened it, revealing pages of medical jargon, lab results, and a signature line at the bottom. I flipped through, my eyes scanning for any note about gender identification. The autopsy noted, female, was repeated in several places, each time accompanied by a stamp that looked freshly inked. A thought struck me like a sudden audit discrepancy. The stamp seemed too uniform, too perfect, as if it had been applied after the fact. I looked up at Ashley, who was watching me intently. Do you know who performed the autopsy? I asked. She shook her head. I don't have that information. The hospital handled everything. My mind raced. If the report had been altered, who had the access and motive to do so? George, Ashley said suddenly, gaining a hint of urgency. We should focus on getting Loss laid to rest. The family needs closure. I felt a surge of frustration, but I kept my voice level. Closure comes from truth, not from assuming what's easiest. She sighed, a sound that seemed genuine but also rehearsed. Just trust me, okay? I'm trying to help. I met her gaze, seeing the flicker of something I couldn't name, perhaps fear, perhaps determination. Okay, I said. Let's see the rest of the paperwork first. Ashley nodded and stepped back, allowing me to examine the documents. As I did, the scent of antiseptic grew stronger, mixing with a faint trace of lavender that seemed to come from her perfume. I noticed a small detail on the corner of one page, a tiny smudge that looked like a fingerprint. My forensic training kicked in. I lifted the page to the light, examining the ridge pattern. It wasn't a full print, but the shape was unusual, not matching any of the usual officers' prints I'd seen in the department. I slipped the page back, my thoughts racing. Officer, I said, calling him back. Can you check who handled the body after the initial exam? He frowned. I'll have to ask the supervisor. While he went away, Ashley leaned close again, her breath warm against my ear. George, you're overthinking this. Loss is gone. Let's honor her memory. I turned my head slightly, catching the scent of her perfume more clearly, lavender with a hint of vanilla. It was pleasant, but it also felt like a mask. I need to be sure, I replied, my voice low but firm. She straightened, her smile fixed. Sure. I'll be here if you need me. The officer returned, his expression grave. The supervising pathologist is Dr. Langley. He's on call today. I nodded. Can we speak with him? He glanced at Ashley, then at me. I'll arrange it. As he walked off, Ashley moved to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. George, she said without looking back. Remember, family sticks together. Even when the facts are confusing. I watched her leave, the door clicking shut behind her. The room felt suddenly too large. The hum of the ventilation louder. I opened the folder again, focusing on the laboratory results. A line caught my eye. Toxicology screen. Negative for all substances. My eyes drifted to the photograph attached to the report. A grainy image of the face covered by the sheet. The lighting was flat, making it hard to discern subtle features. I slid my fingertip along the jawline drawn on the paper, feeling its slight roughness. The jaw appeared broader than the photo suggested, more akin to Loss's masculine structure. A sudden doubt crept in. Had the photograph been altered? I lifted the picture, holding it up to the light. The edges looked crisp, but the center seemed slightly blurred, as if someone had retouched it. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the surge of a buried instinct to uncover the truth. I set the picture down and pulled out my notebook, a habit from years of tracing financial discrepancies. I began to list observations. Gender marker female on all official documents. Physical traits consistent with male morphology. Jaw. Shoulder width. Inferred from clothing. Possible tampering with the photograph and the autopsy stamp. Ashley's persistent insistence on accepting the female designation without question. The timing of the report coinciding with the transfer of funds from the family trust. I paused, my pen hovering over the page. The pieces were aligning like ledger entries that didn't balance. George? Ashley's voice came from the doorway, soft but insistent. Are you okay? I looked up, seeing her framed in the light, her expression a mix of concern and something else, perhaps anticipation. I need to talk to Dr. Langley, I said, closing the notebook. She stepped fully into the room, closing the door softly behind her. He's a good man, she said. He won't mislead you. I managed a tight smile. I hope not. Just then the doctor entered, a middle-aged man with a kind face and a white coat that smelled faintly of soap. Good afternoon, Mr. Whitmore, he greeted, extending his hand. I shook it, noting the firm grip. Doctor, I have some questions about the report, I said. He gestured to a chair. Please. Sit. I sat, feeling the cool leather beneath my palms. Ashley remained standing near the wall, her arms crossed. Dr. Langley opened the folder and pointed to the gender line. We base this on pelvic morphology and hormonal markers, he explained. The pelvis showed a wider subpubic angle, consistent with female. I leaned forward, my brow furrowing. Can I see the actual pelvic measurements? He flipped to a page with numbers and diagrams. Here. The inlet width is 11.2 centimeters. The outlet is 10.8. I did a quick mental conversion. Those numbers were indeed within the typical female range, but they could also appear in a young male with certain developmental variations. Was there any hormonal testing? I asked. He nodded. Estrogen levels were elevated, testosterone low. I felt a prickle of skepticism. Those results could be influenced by external factors, medication, stress, even sample contamination. Doctor, could the sample have been compromised? I asked carefully. He hesitated. It's possible, but unlikely. We followed protocol. Ashley shifted her weight, her eyes flicking between us. George, she said, her voice low, maybe we should accept this and move on. I turned my head to look at her, seeing the way her jaw tightened just a fraction when she spoke. I need to be certain before we make any decisions, I replied. Dr. Langley closed the folder gently. I understand your need for clarity. If you'd like, we can order a second panel, genetic testing, to confirm sex chromosomes. My eyes lit up. That would be helpful. He smiled. I'll arrange it. I said it might take a few days. I let out a breath that sounded like relief. Ashley let out a breath that sounded like relief. Thank you, doctor, she said. He nodded and left the room, the door closing with a soft click. The silence that followed was thick. Ashley moved to stand beside me again, her hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. I could feel the warmth of her palm through the fabric of my shirt. A small, grounding sensation. George, she whispered, whatever the results show, we'll face it together. I stared at the blank wall, the hum of the ventilation, the only sound. My thoughts drifted to the night Loss left for his shift at the garage, the smell of oil and metal clinging to his jacket as he waved goodbye. I remembered the way he'd teased me about my spreadsheets, calling them boring grids. A resolve settled in my chest, steady and firm. I would not let a falsified report or a manipulative narrative erase the truth of who my son was. I turned to Ashley, meeting her gaze. I appreciate you remaining here, I said. She squeezed my shoulder briefly. Without question, she replied. I felt the weight of the moment settle, not as defeat, but as the first step in a longer audit. One where I would trace every discrepancy until the books balanced. George closed the notebook and leaned back in the chair, the leather cool against his palms. The hum of the ventilation system filled the quiet room, a steady reminder that life continued even when his thoughts felt stuck. He stared at the blank wall, letting the memory of his son's wave at the garage door settle in his mind like a familiar tune. A resolve settled in his chest, steady and firm, promising that he would follow every thread until the numbers matched. Ashley stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. Her voice was soft, a low murmur that seemed to fill the space between them. George, whatever the results show, we'll face it together. She squeezed his shoulder briefly before pulling away, her eyes searching his for any sign of doubt. He turned his head to meet her gaze, feeling the weight of her touch through the fabric of his shirt. Thank you for staying, he said, his tone steady despite the storm inside. She smiled, a gesture that felt both genuine and rehearsed, and replied, always. The doctor's earlier words lingered in the air, the possibility of genetic testing a thin thread of hope. George felt a spark of determination ignite, a quiet promise to himself that he would not let a falsified report erase the truth of who his son was. He straightened his posture, ready to begin the quiet audit of his own life. Later that evening, after Ashley had retreated to her room, George moved to the study. The desk lamp cast a warm pool of light over the scattered papers, the soft glow catching the edge of a silver frame that held a faded photograph of Sarah smiling beside a young boy. He traced the edge of the frame with his thumb, feeling the smooth wood beneath his fingertip. A soft knock came at the door. He called out, "Come in," and Ashley entered, carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs of tea. She set it down gently, the ceramic clinking softly against the wood. I thought you might like something warm, she said, her voice gentle, the steam curling around her face like a quiet promise. He nodded, accepting the mug with both hands. The heat seeped into his palms, grounding him in the moment. Thank you, he replied, taking a slow sip. The tea was herbal. Chamomile, perhaps. Its scent mild and soothing. Ashley settled into the chair opposite him, crossing her legs at the ankle. She glanced at the papers scattered across the desk, her eyes flickering over the columns of numbers. "You look deep in thought," she observed, her tone light but with an undercurrent of curiosity. He smiled faintly. "Just trying to make sense of a few things. Numbers don't lie, but people sometimes do." He tapped a finger against a column of figures, the sound soft but deliberate. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. "Is there something specific bothering you?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern that seemed genuine. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There's a discrepancy in the trust fund records. A transfer that doesn't match the dates we were given." He kept his voice even, avoiding any hint of accusation. Her eyebrows rose slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her features before she smoothed her expression. "Oh? Which transfer are you referring to?" she inquired, her tone shifting to one of keen interest. He pointed to a line near the bottom of the page, the ink slightly smudged from handling. "This one, dated the day after Sarah passed. $10,000 moved from the family trust to an account I don't recognize." He watched her reaction, noting the way her jaw tightened just a fraction. She leaned back, crossing her arms loosely over her chest. "I remember that day. We were dealing with so much, the funeral arrangements, the paperwork. It's easy for a mistake to slip in." Her voice was calm, but there was a note of defensiveness that he couldn't ignore. He nodded slowly. "Mistakes happen, but the amount is significant. I want to trace where it went." He tapped the paper again, his fingertip tracing the edge of the number. She smiled, a thin line that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, I'll help you look. We'll get to the bottom of it together." She reached out, placing her hand over his on the desk for a brief moment before pulling away. The contact was brief, but it left a warmth that lingered on his skin. He felt a flicker of suspicion, a quiet voice in his mind questioning the ease of her offer. He pushed it aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. "Let's start with the bank statements," he said, his voice firm. "I'll need access to the online portal." He glanced at her, waiting for her response. She nodded, her expression shifting to eager cooperation. "I will open the reports right now. Wait for me a moment." She rose gently, her movements graceful, then walked to the work desk where the laptop was closed. She opened the lid, the screen lit up with a soft light. As she typed, he watched the reflection of the screen in her glasses, the lines of code and numbers scrolling past. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were observing a scene from a distance rather than participating in it. After a few moments, she turned the screen toward him. "Here's the transfer you mentioned," she said, pointing to a line highlighted in yellow. It went to an account under the name Evergreen Holdings. He leaned in, squinting at the details. The date matched the one he had seen on the paper. The amount was exactly $10,000. "Who is Evergreen Holdings?" he asked, his voice low. She shrugged, a gesture that seemed casual but carried an undercurrent of something else. "I'm not sure. It sounds like a holding company. Maybe it's related to some investment Sarah was looking into before she passed." Her tone was light, but her eyes flicked to the doorway as if expecting someone to appear. He frowned slightly, the name ringing a faint bell from a conversation he couldn't quite place. "Did Sarah ever mention this company?" he inquired. His curiosity piqued. She shook her head, her hair brushing her shoulders. "Not that I recall. She kept most of her investment talk to herself, but I remember her mentioning a desire to diversify the portfolio." She paused, then added, "I think she wanted to make sure the boys were provided for no matter what." He nodded, absorbing her words. The explanation sounded plausible, yet a small doubt lingered at the edge of his thoughts. He decided to dig deeper, to follow the money trail wherever it led. "Can you pull up the full statement for that account?" he asked, his tone professional. She clicked a few more times, the keyboard tapping softly. "Sure thing," she replied, her voice steady. After a brief pause, She turned the screen back toward him. The transaction history unfolded, showing a series of smaller deposits and withdrawals over the past few months. He scanned the list, noting a pattern of regular payments that resembled loan repayments. "These look like payments toward a loan," he murmured, more to himself than to her. She leaned in, her forehead creasing slightly. "A loan? For what?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. He pointed to a recurring entry of $250 every month. It could be a personal loan, maybe something he took out for school or a car. He kept his voice neutral, hoping not to reveal the unease coiling inside him. She nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Loss did mention needing extra cash for his car repairs a while back." She smiled faintly, as if recalling a fond memory. He felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with unease. The memory of his son's old car, a sputtering sedan that needed constant attention, flashed through his mind. He remembered the late nights spent under the hood, the smell of oil and gasoline, the way his son would grin after fixing a particularly stubborn issue. "Do you recall the exact amount he needed?" he asked, his tone gentle. She thought for a moment, her eyes drifting to the window where the twilight deepened. "I think he mentioned around 1,500. He was worried about the interest rates building up." She glanced back at him, her expression softening. He never liked asking for help, though. He swallowed, the memory of his son's pride tightening his chest. "I wish he had come to us," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. Her touch was warm, grounding. "He knew we'd help if he asked," she whispered, her voice sincere. Sometimes pride gets in the way. He squeezed her hand gently, appreciating the gesture even as a part of him questioned the timing of her empathy. He pulled his hand back after a moment, feeling the need to maintain a clear head. "Let's check the source of those loan payments," he said, shifting his focus back to the screen. "Where did the money come from originally?" She navigated to the transaction details, her fingers moving with practiced ease. "The funds came from a personal loan account under your name, George," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "It looks like you took out a line of credit 6 months ago to cover some unexpected expenses." He stared at the screen, the numbers blurring for a second. He did recall taking out a line of credit to repair the roof after a storm, but the amount was far larger than what he remembered borrowing. He frowned, trying to reconcile the discrepancy. "That doesn't match what I recall," he said, his voice low but firm. "I took out a loan for roof repairs, not for a personal line of credit that size." She tilted her head, considering his words. "Perhaps the bank combined the loans into one account for easier management?" she suggested, her tone helpful but hinting at something else. He shook his head slowly, the doubt growing louder. "I keep separate records for each purpose. I would have noticed a merge like that." He tapped the pen against his notebook, the sound sharp in the quiet room. She sighed, a soft sound that seemed more resigned than frustrated. "Maybe we should call the bank tomorrow and get a clear breakdown. They can explain any merges or transfers." She stood, stretching her arms above her head, the movement graceful. He nodded, appreciating her practical suggestion. "That sounds like a good plan." He stood as well, feeling the stiffness in his shoulders ease slightly as he moved. They walked together to the kitchen, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath their feet. She filled the kettle, the sound of water bubbling filling the silence. He leaned against the counter, watching the steam rise as the water heated. While they waited, she turned to him, her expression earnest. "You know, I've been thinking about how much Sarah loved this house. She always said the walls held our laughter and our tears." She paused, gazing out the window at the darkened sky. "I want to honor that memory by making sure everything is fair and just for everyone involved." I felt a tug at my heart, her words echoing my own desire to protect my family's legacy. I felt a tug at my heart, Her words matched my own desire to protect my family's legacy. "I want the same," he replied, his voice steady. "I just need to know the truth." The kettle's whistle pierced the silence, a sharp sound that made both of them jump. She gave a light laugh, a warm and sincere sound. "Looks like we're ready now." She poured the hot water into 2 mugs, the steam swirling like tiny ghosts. She handed him his cup, her fingers brushing his briefly. He accepted it, feeling the heat seep into his palms once again. They sat at the small kitchen table, the tea warming their hands as they sipped in companionable silence. The night outside deepened, the stars beginning to peek through the veil of clouds. After a few minutes, she set her cup down with a soft clink. "I'll call the bank first thing tomorrow," she said, her tone resolute. "And if anything looks off, we'll get to the bottom of it together." He nodded, appreciating her willingness to help. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "It means a lot to have you by my side." She smiled, the expression reaching her eyes this time. "Always," she replied, her voice soft but firm. He felt a tentative sense of relief settle in his chest, though a small part of him remained watchful, aware that trust needed to be earned, not given freely. He took another sip of tea, the flavor grounding him in the present moment. Later, after she had retired to her room, George returned to the study. He pulled out a fresh notebook and opened to a blank page. He began to write, his pen moving steadily across the paper as he listed the discrepancies he had noticed so far. He wrote down the date of the transfer, the amount, the recipient account name, and the loan payments that seemed to follow a pattern. He noted the names of the banks involved, the reference numbers, and any reference notes he could find. As he wrote, a thought occurred to him. He remembered a conversation he had overheard months ago between Sarah and Ashley, where Sarah had mentioned wanting to set up a trust for Loss's future education. He flipped to an older page in his notebook, where he had jotted down notes from that conversation. The memory surfaced. Sarah speaking softly, her voice filled with hope. "I want to make sure Loss has every opportunity, even if we're not here to see him through." Ashley had nodded, adding, "We'll make sure the funds are protected and used wisely." He stared at his notes, the pieces beginning to shift in his mind. If Sarah had intended to set up a trust for Loss's education, why would money be moving out of the family trust shortly after her passing? And why would it appear as a loan from his own line of credit? A cold realization began to form, but he pushed it aside, reminding himself to stay objective. He needed concrete evidence, not just suspicions. He closed the notebook with a soft thud, stood, and stretched his arms above his head, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It read 10:15 at night. He decided to call it a night, trusting that tomorrow would bring clearer answers. He turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness save for the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains. As he lay down, his mind replayed the day's events, each piece clicking into place like a puzzle slowly revealing its picture. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, his dreams were filled with numbers and ledgers, with faces he knew and voices he trusted, all swirling together in a restless search for truth. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting striped patterns across the wooden floor. George woke with a sense of purpose, the events of the previous day settling into a clear plan. He rose, stretched, and made his way to the kitchen, where Ashley was already at the counter, preparing breakfast. She turned as he entered, a smile spreading across her face. "Good morning," she said, her voice bright. "I made your favorite scrambled eggs with toast." He returned her smile, grateful for the normalcy of the moment. "Thank you," he replied, taking a seat at the table. She placed a plate in front of him, the eggs steaming gently, the toast golden brown. They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments, the clutters of cutlery and the occasional sip of coffee filling the space between them. After finishing, Ashley cleared the plates, her movements efficient and graceful. "Ready to make that call?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. He nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Yes, let's get some answers. She picked up the cordless phone from its cradle and dialed the bank's customer service number. The line rang a few times before a polite voice answered. Good morning. You've reached First Community Bank. How may I assist you today? The representative said, her tone professional and warm. Ashley spoke first, her voice clear and confident. Hello. This is Ashley Miller. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. George Whitmore. Account number ending in 4279. I'd like to request a detailed transaction history for the past 6 months, specifically for any transfers linked to the account ending in 9321. There was a brief pause as the representative typed. Certainly, Miss Miller. One moment, please. While I retrieve that information, George listened, his fingers resting lightly on the tabletop. He could hear the faint hum of the office in the background, the occasional click of a keyboard. After a short wait, the representative returned. I have the statements ready. Would you like them emailed to you, or would you prefer a printed copy mailed to your address? Ashley glanced at George, who gave a small nod. Email would be fastest, please. Certainly, the representative replied. I'll send them to the email on file. Is there anything else I can assist you with today? Ashley thanked her, and the call ended with a courteous goodbye. She set the phone down, her expression thoughtful. They said it'll be in my inbox within 15 minutes, she said, turning to face him. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. Good. Let's check it as soon as it arrives. They waited in silence, the minutes ticking by on the wall clock. When the notification finally chimed on Ashley's laptop, she opened the email and downloaded the attached PDF. She opened the file, the pages scrolling across the screen. She pointed to the first page, her finger tracing a line of text. Here's the transfer you asked about, she said, her voice low. $10,000 moved from the family trust to Evergreen Holdings on the 12th of March, 2024. He leaned in closer, studying the details. The transaction ID was listed, along with a reference note that read, Investment per account holder request. He frowned, the words feeling off. Investment? He echoed, his tone skeptical. I don't recall authorizing any investment through that company. She tilted her head, considering maybe it was set up under Sarah's name? She often handled the investment side of things. Her tone was helpful, but there was an edge of something else he couldn't quite place. He shook his head slowly. Sarah never dealt with offshore holdings or obscure holding companies. She preferred blue-chip stocks and municipal bonds. He paused, his mind racing. Evergreen Holdings doesn't sound familiar at all. She sighed, a soft sound that seemed more contemplative than frustrated. Let's look at the incoming side of that account. Maybe we can see where the money came from originally. She scrolled down, her finger stopping at a series of deposits leading up to the large transfer. See here, she said, pointing. 3 deposits of $2,500 each, all coming from an external account labeled Personal Loan, GW. He felt a jolt of recognition. That's my line of credit, he whispered, the realization hitting him like a cold wave. The bank must have moved the funds from my credit line to cover the transfer. She nodded, her eyes meeting his. It looks like the bank treated the loan as available funds and used it to fulfill the request. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of something else. Perhaps satisfaction. Perhaps unease. He stared at the screen, the numbers blurring for a moment as anger and confusion warred inside him. Who authorized this? He asked, his voice low but firm. She glanced at the screen again, then back at him. The request came from an authorized signatory on the trust account. She paused, letting the words settle. According to the bank, the signature matched the one on file for Sarah Whitmore. He felt a chill run down his spine. Sarah's signature had been forged, Or at least that was what the implication suggested. His mind raced back to the night he had found the silver rhodonite ring hidden in the desk drawer, a piece Sarah had always worn, now tucked away as if hidden deliberately. He looked at Ashley, his gaze steady. "Are you saying someone signed her name?" he asked, his tone measured but edged with urgency. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "The bank system flagged it as a match, but they advised us to request a forensic handwriting analysis if we had doubts." Her voice was smooth, almost rehearsed. He felt a spark of anger flare, but he forced himself to stay composed. "Let's get that analysis done," he said, standing up. "I want to know for sure whose signature is on that request." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'll contact the bank's fraud department today. They can expedite the review." She moved to the staircase toward the door, then paused, looking back at him. "You know, I've always wanted what's best for this family. For Sarah, for Loss, for you." She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, the gesture brief but deliberate. He felt the warmth of her palm through his shirt, a sensation that was both comforting and unsettling. He covered her hand with his for a moment, feeling the faint tremor in her fingers. "I know you do," he replied, his voice softer than he intended. "Let's just make sure the truth comes out no matter where it leads." She smiled. A genuine curve of her lips this time. "Agreed." She gave his shoulder a final squeeze before stepping away. He watched her leave the room, the click of the door closing softly behind her. He turned back to the laptop, the spreadsheet still open on the screen. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a resolve to follow the trail wherever it led. Even if it twisted through shadows he preferred not to see. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to list the next steps. Contact the bank's fraud unit. Request a handwriting analysis. Obtain a copy of the trust agreement. And perhaps most importantly, reach out to Loss if he was still reachable, to hear his side of the story. As he wrote, the morning light grew brighter, casting sharp lines across the desk. He felt the weight of the task ahead, but also a quiet confidence that came from facing the unknown head-won. The day stretched before him, full of questions waiting to be answered. And he was ready to seek them out, one careful step at a time. The morning light filtered through the blinds and fell across the open ledger on George's desk. He traced a line of ink with his fingertip, feeling the faint ridge where a number had been altered. The quiet of the house pressed in, broken only by the soft click of the old clock on the mantel. He leaned back, feeling the cool leather of the chair against his palms, and let the numbers settle in his mind. He thought about the life insurance policy he had found tucked inside Sarah's old filing cabinet. The paper was crisp, the seal unbroken, and the wording clear. George Whitmore was named primary beneficiary for the bulk of the estate, with a smaller portion earmarked for Loss. The memory of Sarah's hand brushing the document as she signed it surfaced, warm and familiar. He remembered the way she had smiled, the way her eyes had crinkled at the corners when she talked about protecting their future. A soft knock came at the office door. Ashley appeared in the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her, a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I thought you might want some coffee," she said, her voice smooth, each word measured. She moved to the small table and poured 2 cups, the steam curling in the morning light. George accepted the cup, feeling the warmth seep into his fingers. "Thank you," he said, his tone measured, the words deliberate. He took a sip, letting the bitterness ground him. Ashley leaned against the desk, her gaze flicking to the open ledger. "You've been looking at the accounts a lot lately," she remarked, her tone light but edged with curiosity. "Is everything all right?" He set the cup down, the ceramic making a soft clink. "I noticed a transfer that didn't match the usual pattern," he replied, choosing his words carefully. A large sum moved from the trust to a personal account the day Loss passed. Her smile faltered for a heartbeat, then steadied. "Oh, that was just to cover some unexpected expenses," she said, her voice softening. The funeral arrangements, the lawyer's fees, the little things that add up when you're trying to keep things running smoothly. She paused, letting the words settle. I know it looks odd from the outside, but I was only trying to help. George felt a flicker of irritation rise, but he kept his voice even. Help is one thing. Moving money without telling me is another, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. Who authorized that transfer? She tilted her head, a gesture that seemed practiced. The request came from an authorized signatory on the trust account. She answered, her tone reassuring. The bank said the signature matched the one on file for Sarah Whitmore. She paused, letting the implication hang. If you have doubts, we can request a forensic handwriting analysis. I'll call the fraud department today. He felt a knot tighten in his chest. The memory of the silver rhodonite ring hidden in Sarah's desk drawer surfaced again, the way it had felt cold against his palm when he first found it. He remembered how Sarah always wore it, how it had seemed to pulse with her presence. Now it lay hidden, as if someone had tried to erase a piece of her. I want to see that analysis, he said, his voice low but firm. I need to know whose name really appears on that request. Ashley's eyes flicked to the door, then back to him. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. The touch brief but deliberate. I've always wanted what's best for this family, she murmured, her voice sounding almost rehearsed. For Sarah, for Loss, for you. She gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze before stepping back. Let's get the truth out, whatever it leads to. She turned and walked toward the hallway, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving George alone with the ledger and the lingering scent of her perfume. He opened his laptop again, pulling up the bank's online portal. The numbers blurred for a moment, as anger and confusion warred inside him. He typed a request for the handwriting review, his fingers moving with purpose. After submitting the request, he pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to list his next steps. Contact the fraud unit, obtain a copy of the trust agreement, and reach out to Loss if he could still be reached. The morning light grew brighter, casting sharp lines across the desk. He felt the weight of the task ahead, yet a quiet resolve settled in his chest. He was ready to follow the trail, no matter where it led. This part is repetitive. When transitioning from his phone, sang my phone suddenly. One should choose one of the two or combine them. The screen lit up with an unknown number, flashing in green. I hesitated, then slid to answer, keeping my voice low. Hello? I asked. A familiar voice came through, soft but urgent. Mr. Whitmore. This is Chloe. I got your message. She sounded strained, as if she had been crying. Chloe, thank you for calling back. I need to know if you've heard from Loss lately. I chose my words carefully, trying not to reveal too much. Chloe exhaled sharply. I haven't seen Loss since the night before everything happened. He acted differently, always talking about a plan to disappear, to start over where no one would look. My chest tightened. What did Loss say exactly? I leaned forward, the desk lamp casting a warm pool over my shadow, over my notes. She told Loss that if he disappeared for a while, the creditors would lose interest. She promised to handle the paperwork, so everything would look like an accident. She even showed him a fake ID she said she could obtain. Chloe's voice trembled. Back then I thought she was just a good friend, but now I wonder. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Did she mention anything about changing records? I asked, keeping my tone steady. She laughed and said she knew a guy at the county office who could tweak a birth certificate. She said it would be easy, that no one would double-check a young man's file. Chloe paused. I didn't take it seriously then. I thought it was just talk. I thanked her and ended the call, the line clicking silently. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. I rose from the chair and walked to the closet where I kept a box of Loss's old things. The wood floor creaked under each step, a familiar sound that steadied me. I opened the box and pulled out a folded jacket. In the jacket pocket, A thin piece of paper caught my eye. I opened it, seeing a list of amounts and dates hastily written, the numbers in shaky handwriting. My medical instinct kicked in. I followed the pattern, noticing each amount matched a recent withdrawal from the family trust fund. Realizing this hit me like a wave. Loss had withdrawn the money, possibly to pay for an emergency. I set the paper aside and reached for a small velvet pouch at the bottom of the box, finding a silver ring glinting faintly inside. Its design mimicked Sarah's rhodonite band, but the stone was paler, the band thinner, and an engraving inside bore a date that was not ours. This was a copy, not the original. My thoughts drifted to the hidden drawer in Sarah's desk, where I was sure the original ring lay hidden. Someone had placed this imitation here, perhaps to mislead anyone searching for proof of her presence. I slipped the copy into my pocket, wondering where the real one might be. A stack of medical bills lay tucked beneath a stack of college textbooks. I flipped through them, noticing a recurring name. Dr. Harriman, a specialist in endocrine therapy. The dates corresponded to the weeks after Sarah's passing, when Loss supposedly suffered a mysterious illness. I remembered the autopsy report that listed Loss as female. Perhaps the records had been altered to support a false identity claim for him. I pulled out my laptop and opened the secure portal for the county health department. After entering the credentials I had retrieved from Sarah's old files, I pulled up Loss's patient record. The screen showed a stark discrepancy. The initial admission listed the patient as male, with a medical record number matching Loss's known identifier. A later adduan, however, crossed out the male marker and inserted a female designation, the signature block looking different from the doctor's usual script. A chill ran through me. Someone had put a lot of effort into rewriting history. I saved the page as a PDF and emailed it to myself for safekeeping. The apartment grew quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I leaned back, listening to the soft ticking of the wall clock. My thoughts turned to Ashley. If she had orchestrated this, she would need a way to monitor my moves. I stood and walked to my desk, scanning the surface for anything out of place. My eyes fell on the lamp. I lifted the shade and felt a tiny ridge near the base. I pressed gently, and a small plastic piece popped out. A microphone no larger than a pea, its wire leading into the lamp's cord. My breath caught. Someone had been listening. I slipped the device into my pocket and turned to the door. Just then, the knob turned and Ashley stepped inside, her smile bright, but her eyes flickering to the lamp. "George, I thought you might want some tea," she said, her voice smooth, her hands clasped in front of her. "You've been working hard today." I kept my expression neutral, the microphone heavy in my pocket. "Thank you, Ashley. I'm fine." I gestured toward the sofa. "Please, have a seat." She sat, crossing her legs neatly, and placed a small tray on the coffee table. Steam rose from the cup, carrying a faint scent of jasmine. "I heard you were looking at the old files again," she remarked, her tone light. "Is everything all right?" I chose my words carefully, letting the silence stretch before I answered. "I found a discrepancy in Loss's medical record. It shows his sex was changed after the fact." I watched her face for any reaction. Her smile did not waver. "Oh, that must be a clerical error. Hospitals make mistakes all the time." She lifted her cup, took a sip, and set it down with a soft clink. "You know how stressful it's been for everyone. Let's not jump to conclusions." I felt the urge to press harder, but I remembered the microphone still hidden in my pocket. I needed more concrete proof before confronting her. "I'll keep looking," I said, my voice even. "If you come across anything unusual, please let me know." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the window. "Of course, George. Family looks out for each other." She stood, smoothed her skirt, and headed for the door. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, then faded as she closed it softly behind her. I waited until the sound of her footsteps disappeared down the hall, then pulled the microphone from my pocket and examined it under the desk lamp. The wire was fresh, the insulation unblemished. Someone had installed it recently, likely within the past few days. A sudden, sharp knock echoed from the front door. I froze, the microphone still in my hand. Who could be calling at this hour? I set the device down, walked to the entryway, and peered through the peephole. A tall figure in a dark coat stood there, face obscured by the brim of a hat. I could not make out any features, but the stance was familiar. Someone who moved with purpose. I opened the door just enough to speak. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. The figure lowered the hat slightly, revealing a face I recognized from the county office, a clerk I had dealt with when filing the trust paperwork. He held out an envelope, sealed with a red wax stamp. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, his tone formal. "This arrived for you this afternoon." No return address. He handed it over, then turned and walked away without another word. I closed the door, the envelope cool in my palm. I broke the wax seal and unfolded the paper inside. The top bore a forged death certificate, the name Lois Whitmore listed as female. The date of death matching the day we had visited the morgue in the police evidence bag George had just given him. At the bottom, a single line was typed in bold. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." My heart hammered. Someone wanted me to cease my investigation, and they were willing to threaten me to get it done. A cold draft slipped through the cracked window as I sat at the desk, the envelope still warm in my palm. The wax seal had broken cleanly, revealing the forged death certificate that named Lois as female, and bore the blunt warning to stop digging. I folded the paper slowly, feeling the faint ridges of the forged ink under my fingertips. The lamp above cast a soft pool of light, enough to read the fine print, but not enough to chase the shadows from the corners of the room. I inhaled the faint scent of jasmine that clung to the air from Ashley's earlier visit, a scent that now felt like a thin veil over something much sharper. I reached for the phone on the cradle, its weight familiar in my hand, and dialed Chloe's number. The line rang twice before a soft voice answered, tinged with surprise. "Mr. Whitmore?" Chloe asked, her voice cautious. "Chloe, it's George. I need to ask you something about Lois," I said, keeping my voice level. "Is everything all right?" she asked, a hint of worry threading through her words. "I found a document that suggests someone tried to alter Lois's official record. I wanted to know if you ever heard him mention anything about changing his official papers," I replied, choosing each word carefully. A pause stretched. Then she spoke again, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He never talked about paperwork like that. He was scared of debt collectors, not of paperwork. But he did mention once that someone offered him a way out, a way to disappear without leaving a trace." I felt a tightness in my chest, not the sudden jolt of fear but a steady pressure, like a ledger column that refused to balance. "Has he ever mentioned the name of the person who proposed it?" Toy hoy. "He never gave a name. He just said it was someone who knew his mother well," Chloe said, and I could hear the faint rustle of paper as she shifted in her seat. "Thank you, Chloe. If you hear anything else, please let me know," I said, ending the call with a soft click. I set the phone down and turned my gaze to the small aquarium on the shelf, where Goldie darted between the plastic plants. The fish's sudden dart reminded me of a flicker in a ledger column that didn't add up. I stood, stretched my legs, and walked to the window. The street below was quiet, the streetlights casting long pools of amber on the wet pavement. A distant siren wailed, then faded. My thoughts turned to the envelope. Whoever had sent it knew I was digging. They also knew I would recognize the forged document as a threat. I needed proof that could not be dismissed as a clerical error. I decided to visit the storage unit where Lois kept his few belongings before he vanished. The unit was rented under his name, but the payment had been routed through an account Ashley had helped me set up months ago, ostensibly to help him manage his student loans. I pulled my coat from the hook, slipped my feet into my none loots, none low, none loat, none light. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain that had fallen earlier. My steps echoed softly on the sidewalk as I walked toward the storage facility. A low building with rolling doors painted a faded blue. Fun flickerance. I scanned my eyes. Your options. Let's see. The rate. It appears to be erroneous, or incomplete text. Needs to be removed. The above paragraph also repeats the idea from the previous section that dealt with the envelope. The facility's security light flickered above the gate, casting a sporadic glow that flickerance. I scanned my eyes. Your options. Let's see. The rate. This section is almost a repeat of the previous one, so we should keep the most reasonable version. If you want to keep the repetition for emphasis, make them differ a little. The line rang twice before a soft voice replied. Touched, with surprise. Mr. Whitmore, Chloe said, her tone cautious. Chloe, it's George. I need to ask you something about loss, I said, keeping my voice even. Is everything all right? She asked. A hint of worry weaving through her words. I found a document that indicates someone attempted to change Loss's official record. I wanted to know if you ever heard him mention anything about altering his official papers. I replied, choosing each word carefully. A pause stretched, then she spoke once more, her voice falling to a whisper. He never spoke about paperwork like that. He feared debt collectors, not paperwork, but he once mentioned that someone offered him an escape, a way to vanish without leaving a trace. I felt a tightness in my chest, not the sudden jolt of fear but a steady pressure, like a column in a ledger that refused to balance. Did he ever name who offered that? I asked. He never gave a name. He just said it was someone who knew his mother well, Chloe said, and I could hear the faint rustle of paper as she moved in her seat. Thank you, Chloe. If you hear anything else, please tell me, I said, ending the call with a soft click. Sua darted among thine, darted between for a more natural flow. Spreading long pools could be changed to casting long pools to avoid repeating the idea of spilled onto the porch sao nay. Kao sao, the fish's sudden dart, could be replaced with the sudden movement of the fish, if you want to change the phrasing. Whoever had sent it knew I was digging. They also knew I would see the forged document as a threat. I needed proof that could not be brushed off as a clerical error. I decided to go to the storage unit, where Loss kept his few belongings before he vanished. The unit was rented under his name, but the payment had been directed through an account Ashley had helped me set up months ago, ostensibly to help him manage his student loans. I pulled my coat from the hook, slipped my feet into my worn boots, and stepped out into the darkness. The air was crisp, bearing the faint scent of rain that had fallen earlier. My steps echoed softly on the sidewalk as I walked toward the storage facility, a low building whose rolling doors were painted a faded blue. A soft chime rang from my phone, making me jump. I pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. Leave it alone. You will regret it. I stared at the screen, the glow illuminating the lines of worry around my eyes. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and continued forward, my jaw set. The heavy door of the facility groaned as I pulled it open. Inside, rows of metal units stood like silent sentinels, each marked with a faded number. I moved down the aisle, my flashlight cutting a thin beam through the dimness. Unit 27 bore a small scratch near the lock, a mark I recognized from the day I had helped Load move his boxes in. I fumbled with the key, the metal cold against my fingertips, and the door swung inward with a sigh. The space inside smelled of dust and old cardboard. Boxes were stacked against the far wall, their labels faded. I knelt and began to pull them open, one by one, searching for anything that felt out of place. In the third box, I found a stack of envelopes addressed to Loss, each bearing a different return address. One bore the logo of a payday loan company, another, a credit union. I opened the top envelope and pulled out a letter written in a hurried hand. The words spoke of a looming deadline. a threat of legal action if payment was not made within 30 days. My stomach tightened as I read the sum owed, a figure that made my head spin. I flipped through the rest of the stack and found a photograph tucked behind a bundle of bills. It showed Loss standing beside a woman I did not recognize. Her arm looped through his, both smiling at the camera. The woman's hair was dark, her eyes bright, and she wore a simple blouse. On the back of the photo, in the same hurried hand, was a note. "Thanks for the help, Ash. You're the only one who gets it." My breath caught. The name on the note matched the woman who had been calling herself my stepdaughter. I slipped the photograph into my pocket and continued searching. At the bottom of the box lay a small leather wallet worn at the corners. I opened it and found a driver's license with Loss's picture. But the sex marker had been altered from M to F with a careful line of correction fluid. Beneath the license lay a handful of cash and a business card for a private investigator firm whose name I did not recognize. I slipped the wallet into my coat pocket, stood, and glanced at the clock on the wall. The hands showed 10:45. I had spent nearly an hour in the unit, and the weight of what I had found pressed against my chest like a ledger that refused to balance. I left the unit, locked the door behind me, and walked back toward my car. The night air felt sharper now, as if the city itself were holding its breath. I slid into the driver's seat, placed the photograph and the wallet on the passenger seat, and turned the key. The engine coughed to life, and I pulled on to the empty street. My mind raced through the pieces. Ashley's sudden concern, the forged death certificate, the altered medical record, the loan documents, and now the photograph linking her to Loss in a way that went beyond step-o parent and step-o child. I pulled into the driveway of my house, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, staring at the dark windows. The house felt too quiet, too still, as if it were waiting for me to make the next move. I opened the car door, stepped onto the porch, and heard a soft click from the side door. I turned and saw Ashley standing there, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression a mix of concern and something I could not quite place. "George, I heard you come in," she said, her voice smooth, the same tone she had used earlier that day. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. After what you found." I met her gaze, noting the way her eyes flicked to the coat pocket where the photograph lay hidden. "I'm fine, Ashley. Just needed some air," I replied, keeping my tone measured, the way I would when reviewing a ledger for discrepancies. She stepped closer, her shoes whispering against the wooden porch. "You look tired. Let me get you some tea. Chamomile. To help you relax." She moved past me and opened the door, gesturing toward the kitchen. I followed, my steps deliberate, and took a seat at the kitchen table. The kettle began to hum, its sound filling the quiet space. Ashley moved about with practiced ease, pulling out 2 mugs, placing a tea bag in each, and pouring the steaming water. She set one mug in front of me, the steam curling up and carrying the faint scent of chamomile. "You've been working hard," she said, sitting opposite me. "I know this has been hard on you. Losing Sarah, it's a lot." I lifted the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "I appreciate the gesture." She nodded, her gaze steady. But I noticed a slight tightening at the corner of her mouth. "If you need anything, any papers, any help with the accounts, just let me know. I'm here for you." I took a slow sip, letting the liquid warm my throat. The kettle clicked off, and silence settled between us, broken only by the occasional tick of the clock on the wall. "Ashley," I began, choosing my words as carefully as I would phrase a clause in a contract. "I found something in Loss's storage unit today. A photograph. It shows him with a woman." I read the note on the back that said, "Thanks for the help, Ash." My eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then settled back into their usual calm. My eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then settled back into their usual calm. "I'm not sure what you mean, George," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't recognize that image. Loss. He's been struggling, and I've tried to support him where I could." I set the mug down, the ceramic making a faint clink against the saucer. "The note uses your name, and the handwriting matches the letters I found in the unit that were addressed to him from loan companies." She leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, her hands clasped tightly. "George, I would never do anything to hurt him or you. I've been trying to keep this family together since your wife passed. You know that. I would risk everything for a spiteful game. Sua would risk everything for a spiteful game, to form a complete sentence or merge into the previous idea. Okay, look, I met Loss a few months ago at a community center where he was volunteering. He seemed lost, overwhelmed by debt. I offered to help him figure out a payment plan. That's all. I never meant to overstep." I watched her, noting the way her fingers intertwined, the way her gaze flicked to the window where the street lamp cast a thin bar of light across the linoleum. "What about the altered medical records?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. She swallowed, her throat working. I don't know how that happened. I swear I didn't touch his records. I only tried to help him with the bills." I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking slightly under my weight. "If you truly helped him, then why would his records show a change in sex? Why would someone forge a death certificate? Why would someone send me a threat?" Her eyes flickered to the doorway, then back to me. "I don't have answers for those questions, George. I really don't. I only want what's best for everyone. I thought helping him with his debts would keep him safe. I never imagined it would lead to this." I stared at her for a moment, the silence thick and heavy. The kettle sat cold on the stove, the tea untouched in its cup. I could see the fear in her eyes, not the fear of being caught, but the fear of being misunderstood. "All right," I said finally, my voice low. "I need to check something. I'll be back shortly." I rose, pushed my chair back, and walked toward the door. Ashley stood as well, her hand hovering near the strap of her purse. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. I nodded, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch. The night air was cooler now, a faint breeze stirring the leaves of the oak tree that lined the walkway. I paused, looking back at the house. The light from the kitchen window spilled onto the porch, casting a soft glow over Ashley's silhouette. She remained still, her hands clasped tight, her eyes fixed on me. I turned and walked down the path, my steps measured, my mind already piecing together the next steps. I needed to verify the handwriting on the note, to trace the loan companies, and to find out who had access to the medical records. Most of all, I needed to find Loss, if he was still alive, to hear his side of the story. As I reached the gate, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a missed call from a number I did not recognize. I hesitated, then pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear. A quiet voice came through the line, slightly distorted by distance. "Mr. Whitmore? This is Detective Langley from the precinct. We received a call about a possible disturbance at your residence. Is everything all right?" I glanced back at the house, saw Ashley still standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm light. "Everything's fine, Detective," I said, keeping my tone even. "Just a misunderstanding. Thank you for checking in." There was a pause on the line, then the detective replied, "All right, sir. If anything changes, please call us. Have a good night." I ended the call, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and turned to walk down the street. The night stretched ahead, quiet and uncertain, but I felt a steady resolve settle in my chest, like the balance of a well-audited ledger finally aligning. The night air felt sharper as I stepped onto the porch, the street lamp casting a thin stripe of light across the wooden steps. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward the gate, the phone still warm in my palm from the detective's call. My mind raced with the details he had asked for and the lingering feeling that someone had been watching the house. I reached the gate and paused, looking back at the illuminated kitchen window where Ashley's silhouette had stood just moments before. She was still there, her hands clasped tight, eyes fixed on me, as if waiting for my next move. I turned away and walked down the quiet street, the rhythm of my steps matching the steady beat of my thoughts. After a few blocks, I turned onto the lane that led to the storage facility where I had kept some of Sarah's old files. The building was a low brick structure with a single rolling door that clicked when I entered the code I had memorized from years ago. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dust and old paper. I moved to the back row of units and stopped at the one I had used for the family's financial records. I slid the metal door open and stepped inside, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Boxes were stacked neatly, each labeled in Sarah's neat handwriting. I pulled out the box marked Trust and Wills and set it on the metal table in the center of the room. The lid creaked as I lifted it, revealing folders, envelopes, and a small leather-bound notebook. I flipped through the pages until I found the folder labeled Last Will and Testament, Sarah Whitmore. My heart tightened as I pulled out the document and saw the familiar heading, but the text beneath it was not the language I had seen years ago. The clause that named me as primary beneficiary had been crossed out with a thin line of ink, and in its place a new paragraph designated Ashley Miller as the sole heir to the estate, including the trust fund, the house, and the investment portfolio. The signature line at the bottom bore a flourish that looked eerily like Sarah's script, yet the pressure of the pen seemed off, the strokes too uniform, as if drawn by a steady hand that did not tremble with age. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, not from fear, but from the realization that someone had gone to great lengths to rewrite her final wishes. I slipped the document into my coat pocket and glanced around the unit. A small camera lens peeked from the corner of the ceiling, its red light blinking faintly. My breath caught. Someone had been watching me, or at least monitoring this space. I closed the folder, returned it to the box, and shut the metal door softly. As I turned to leave, the unit's door swung open a fraction and a figure stepped into the dim light. It was Ashley, her face composed, her voice smooth as she spoke. "George, I didn't expect to find you here," she said, her tone light but her eyes scanning the box in my hands. I kept my grip firm on the folder and replied, "I was looking for something I thought I had misplaced. What brings you down here at this hour?" She stepped closer, her hand brushing the metal frame of the unit. "I thought you might need some company. It's late, and the house feels empty without Sarah. I just wanted to make sure you're all right." I glanced at the camera again, its red eye blinking in rhythm with my pulse. "I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just organizing some old papers. You know how it gets when you start sorting through things." She smiled, a tight curve that didn't reach her eyes. "You always were the careful one. Let me help you sort. Maybe we can find what you're looking for together." I felt the urge to pull away, but I also needed to see what she would do if I handed her the folder. I held it out, the edge of the paper catching the low light. "Here, take a look. See if anything looks out of place." She took the folder, her fingers brushing mine for a brief second. She opened it, and her brow furrowed as she read the altered will. Her expression shifted from polite concern to something sharper, a flicker of alarm that she tried to mask with a laugh. "Oh my, this looks different," she said, voice suddenly softer. "I never saw this version before. Perhaps Sarah made a change she never told me about?" I leaned in, keeping my voice low. If she had changed it, why would the signature look off? And why would a camera be watching us right now? She glanced up at the ceiling, then back at me, her smile fading. I don't know about any camera. I only came to check on you. I swear, I had nothing to do with this. I watched her closely, noting the way her fingers tightened around the folder's edge, the slight tremor in her hand that she tried to hide. I decided to test her reaction. "Let's take this to the house," I said. "We can sit down with a cup of tea and go through everything properly. No rush." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's go." We walked back toward the residential street, the night air cooler now, the streetlights casting long shadows. As we approached the house, I noticed a dark shape moving behind the oak tree near the walkway, a silhouette that vanished as soon as I turned my head. My pulse quickened, but I kept my pace steady, matching Ashley's step. Inside, I led her to the kitchen table and placed the folder in front of us. I poured 2 cups of tea, the steam curling up in the quiet room. Ashley sat opposite me, her hands wrapped around the warm ceramic, her eyes flicking to the document every few seconds. "Tell me what you think," I said, pushing the folder toward her. "Does this look like something Sarah would have signed?" She picked up the page, her thumb tracing the crossed-out outline. "It's hard to say," she murmured. "Sarah sometimes changed her mind about things, especially toward the end. She could have signed a new version without telling anyone." I watched her eyes dart to the window, then back to the paper. "And the camera?" I asked softly. "Did you notice anything odd outside?" She laughed, a short sound that lacked warmth. "You're letting your imagination run wild, George. Old houses settle. Lights flicker. It's nothing." I leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight. "If it's nothing, then why did you come down to the storage unit at this hour? Why did you act so surprised when you saw the will?" Her gaze hardened for a split second before she smoothed it into a pleasant mask. "I came because I care about you. I thought you might need help sorting through Sarah's things. I didn't expect to find a discrepancy." I felt the weight of the moment settle between us like a thick blanket. I knew I could not accuse her outright without more proof, but the pieces were aligning too neatly to ignore. I decided to change tactics, to see if she would volunteer more information if I appeared to trust her. "Let's make a copy of this," I said, reaching for the scanner on the counter. "We can keep one for the attorney and one for our records. That way we have a clear picture of what we're dealing with." She nodded, her movements precise as she fed the page into the machine. The scanner whirred, and a soft click signaled the completion of the copy. I slid the original back into the folder and placed the copy beside it. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "I really do want what's best for everyone. Sarah would have wanted us to look out for each other." I looked at her, searching for any sign of sincerity. "Then help me find the truth," I replied. "If there's something else going on, we need to know it together." She smiled again, this time a fraction more genuine. "Of course. Whatever you need." The night deepened outside, the street lamp casting a steady glow through the window. I felt a mixture of caution and cautious hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but I had taken the first step toward uncovering the deception that had woven itself into our lives. I would need more evidence, more witnesses, and perhaps a confrontation that would force the truth into the light. For now, I kept the copied will close, a silent promise to myself that I would not let the lies stand unchallenged. I set the coffee mug down on the worn wooden table and stared at the steam curling up in the quiet kitchen. The night outside had deepened, and the distant hum of traffic sounded like a low hummingbird wing. I pulled the folder containing the copied will closer and felt the familiar weight of paper against my fingertips. A soft knock at the back door made me glance toward the hallway where Ashley's coat still hung on the hook. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the door, pulling it open to see Frank Peterson standing on the step, his shoulders hunched against the chill night air. "George," Frank said, his voice low and rough, "I don't want to be here like this, but I have to meet you in person." I stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. "Come in, Frank. It's cold out there. You look like you've seen a ghost." I stepped inside, shaking off the damp from my coat and let out a breath that fogged the air for a moment. He stepped inside, shaking off the damp from his coat, and let out a breath that fogged the air for a moment. I've been avoiding your calls because I didn't know what to say. Ashley. She's been pressing me for things I never imagined I'd do. I closed the door and led him to the kitchen table, pulling out a chair. Sit down. Tell me what's been happening. He sank into the chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if it might give way. She came to my office 2 weeks ago, said she needed a favor. Said she had a document that needed a signature, something about a trust fund. I didn't ask too many questions. I was desperate for cash after the investment went south. She said she'd pay me well, and I believed her because she seemed so sure of herself. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on the table, my voice low. What exactly did she have you sign? He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the window where the street lamp cast a thin line of light. She had me sign a transfer of funds from the Whitmore Trust to an account she controlled. She said it was a temporary move, that the money would be returned once everything settled. I didn't realize it was a permanent transfer until I saw the bank statement yesterday. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. And the forged death certificate? Did she have you sign that too? He shook his head vigorously, his face paling. No, I never saw that. She said the certificate was already handled by a lawyer she trusted. I only dealt with the money transfer. She threatened me, George. Said if I didn't cooperate, she'd ruin my reputation. That she'd tell everyone I was stealing from clients. I was scared. I felt trapped. I reached out and placed a hand on his forearm, feeling the tremor there. You're not alone in this, Frank. We'll get through it together. But I need to know everything she asked you to do. He took a shaky breath, his voice dropping to a whisper. She also asked me to alter a few lines in a medical record. Said she needed the gender marker changed for a legal matter. I didn't ask why. I just did what she told me to because I thought it was a simple clerical fix. I didn't know it would be used to fake a death. I let his words sink in, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Why would she do all this? What does she stand to gain? His eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and anger. She wants all of the Whitmore fortune. She once told me, in a moment of boastfulness, that she deserved it because she had cared for Sarah when she was sick, and that George had abandoned her after the funeral. She thinks she's entitled to everything, and she'll do whatever it takes to get it. I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my voice steady. Thank you for telling me the truth, Frank. You're not the enemy here. She's using you, just like she's using everyone else. He let out a shaky laugh that held no humor. I feel like a puppet, George. I hate that I let her pull the strings. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the street lamp flicker as a car passed by. You did what you had to do to survive. We'll make sure she can't hurt anyone else. He nodded, his shoulders slackening a fraction. If there's anything I can do to help, just say the word. I'll testify. I'll hand over any emails. Anything. I turned back to him, seeing the genuine regret in his eyes. I'll hold you to that. For now, stay low. Don't go to her office or answer any calls from her unless I'm with you. He gave a small, grateful nod. I will. Thank you for believing me. I walked him to the door, opened it, and watched him step back into the night. The door clicked shut behind him, and I leaned against the wood, listening to the night sounds. A sudden rustle in the bushes near the fence made my heart jump. But it was only a cat darting away. I turned back to the kitchen, the folder still lying open on the table. I needed to act quickly before Ashley sensed that I was on to her. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had saved from a previous case, a forensic document examiner who owed me a favor. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered, cautious and professional. Detective Langley, how can I help you? I kept my tone even, choosing my words carefully. I need you to examine a document for authenticity. It's a will that appears to have been signed by Sarah Whitmore shortly before her death. I suspect it's a forgery. There was a brief pause, then a low hum of acknowledgement. I can help. Bring it to my office tomorrow morning. I'll run the usual tests: ink analysis, paper age, signature comparison. If it's fake, I'll be able to prove it. I felt a sliver of hope rise. Thank you. I'll be there at 9 sharp. I hung up and stared at the phone, the weight of the night settling on my shoulders. I needed to keep Ashley off balance long enough to gather the proof. I walked to the living room and glanced at the empty chair where Goldie usually swam in his bowl. The little goldfish darted in circles, oblivious to the storm brewing above the water's surface. An idea formed, sharp and sudden. I would invite Ashley over under the pretense of reviewing the copied will together. But I would have the document expert waiting just outside, ready to intervene the moment she revealed her true intent. I needed a signal, something innocuous that would alert him without tipping her off. I walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a simple rubber band, the kind used to bundle vegetables. I looped it around the base of the phone charger on the counter. If I snapped it twice in quick succession, it would create a soft, snapping sound that only someone listening closely would notice. I tested it once. The faint snap barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. Satisfied, I returned to the kitchen table and placed the copied will in the center. I poured 2 fresh cups of tea, the steam rising in lazy spirals. I sat down, waiting for the inevitable knock on the door. Minutes later, the bell chimed. A soft, polite sound that made me glance toward the hallway. I took a deep breath, smoothed my shirt, and opened the door to find Ashley standing there, her coat draped over one arm, a tight smile on her face. "George," she said, her voice smooth as polished wood. "I thought you might like some company. I brought some cookies, your favorite, oatmeal raisin." I stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "Thank you, Ashley. Please come in." She slipped off her shoes and followed me to the kitchen, her eyes flicking to the folder on the table as soon as she saw it. I pulled out a chair for her, and she sat down opposite me, her hands resting neatly on her lap. "What do you have there?" she asked, her tone light, but her gaze sharp. I pushed the folder toward her, the copied will facing up. "I found this among Sarah's things. I wanted a second opinion on whether it looks like something she would have signed." She leaned forward, her fingers hovering over the paper before she touched the edge gently. Her eyes scanned the typed clauses, then flicked to the signature line at the bottom. "It does look like her hand," she said after a moment. "But I've seen her sign things in a hurry before. The flourish on the E in her name can vary." I watched her closely, noting the way her jaw tightened just a fraction when she spoke. "Did Sarah ever talk about changing her will after she got sick?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She hesitated, then let out a small, nervous laugh. "Not really. She was pretty set on leaving everything to Loss and to me in equal shares. She didn't like the idea of leaving anything to charities or distant relatives." I nodded, letting the silence stretch for a beat before speaking again. "I spoke with Frank Peterson today." Her eyes narrowed, the smile slipping just enough to reveal a flash of irritation. "Frank? Why would you talk to him?" I kept my tone even, as if discussing the weather. "He came by to tell me he's been feeling pressured lately. He said someone's been asking him to do things he's not comfortable with." She straightened in her chair, her back rigid. "What kind of things?" she asked, her voice losing its pleasant lilt. I let the question hang, then added, "He mentioned being asked to sign papers that moved money out of the trust. He also said he was told to adjust a medical record, something about changing a gender marker." Her face went still for a heartbeat. Then she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "George, you're jumping to conclusions. Frank is a good man, but he's prone to exaggerating when he's scared. I only asked him to help with a few paperwork details because I was overwhelmed after Sarah's passing. I never asked him to do anything illegal." I leaned forward, my elbows on the table, my voice low but firm. If you're being honest, you won't mind if I have a forensic expert look at the original will. He can tell us if the signature is genuine, if the paper matches the era, if the ink is period appropriate. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table, the knuckles whitening. Why would you need to do that? Trust is important in a family, George. Doubting everything will only tear us apart. I felt a pang of sadness, but I kept my resolve steady. I want to know the truth, Ashley. For Sarah's sake, for Loss's sake, and for my own peace of mind. If there's nothing to hide, the expert will confirm it. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. I think we're done here, she said, her voice edged with something that sounded like warning. I'll leave you to